"You'll regret this decision bitterly, Reed." The merchant's voice echoed through the dusty square as he counted the gold coins. The other men laughed, spitting tobacco on the ground. "An Apache? Have you lost your mind?" But Reed Callahan wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were fixed on that bronze-skinned woman, hands bound, knees bleeding in the dry earth. There was something in that gaze. It wasn't fear. It wasn't pleading. It was pure defiance, as if she were saying, "Do your worst, white man. I've already survived hell." In that moment, Reed saw himself reflected in those dark eyes. The same loneliness that had consumed him for 3 years since he buried Sarah and the baby who never took a breath. Everyone thought he was making the biggest mistake of his life, but he knew something no one else knew. Sometimes the best decisions are those everyone condemns, and that woman, whose name he didn't yet know, would change everything. Reed Callahan woke up that October morning without knowing his world was about to turn upside down. The ranch was too quiet, as it had been since Sarah left. He made strong coffee, burned his tongue on the first sip, and didn't even feel it. 3 years had passed, and the pain remained there, a constant companion that refused to leave. "I need supplies," he muttered to himself, looking at the nearly empty pantry. The last thing he wanted was to go into town, face the pitying looks, the unasked questions about when he would move on. As if it were possible to move on when you buried half your soul along with your wife. The trip to Fort Apache took 4 hours. Reed noticed the unusual activity as soon as he reached the main street. A group of men clustered near the general store, their loud voices cutting through the dry desert air. There was something wrong there, an energy that made his stomach turn. "What's going on?" he asked the blacksmith, a grey-bearded man who had always been fair with him. "Mackenzie is selling the last Apache prisoners," the man replied, lowering his voice. "Says the army doesn't want to bother keeping them anymore. Most have already been taken, only one left. Well, you'll see." Reed shouldn't have approached. Should have bought his supplies and returned home. But something pulled him to that circle of men, to the center where Jack Mackenzie, a merchant known for dirty dealings, was displaying his merchandise. "Gentlemen, last chance, an authentic Apache woman, strong, healthy." Mackenzie held a rope tied to the wrists of a woman kneeling in the dirt. Her torn dress barely covered her battered body. Dried blood marked her arms. But it was her face that cut Reed like a knife. There were no tears, no pleading, just a fierce dignity that no rope could bind. The other men made obscene jokes. Mackenzie yanked the rope, making the woman stumble, and it was in that moment she raised her eyes black as obsidian, burning with a rage so intense Reed felt it on his own skin. $50 and she's yours," Mackenzie shouted. "Good for whatever you need, of field work, cooking." He winked suggestively, and the men laughed louder. Reed didn't plan what happened next, didn't think, didn't calculate, simply walked to the middle of the circle and said, "I'll pay 100. The silence was deafening. All eyes turned to him. Mackenzie's eyes widened, clearly surprised. The Apache woman also looked at him, but her expression didn't change. She didn't expect salvation from any white man. "Callahan?" Mackenzie recovered his voice. "Are you sure? She's wild, won't be easy." $200 in gold," Reed interrupted, his voice firm. "Take it or leave it." That's how Reed Callahan became the talk of the entire town. "He's gone crazy from loneliness," they said. 3 years a widower, and now this. But Reed didn't care. He had seen something in those eyes that he recognized immediately. A soul that refused to break, no matter how hard the world tried. The trip back to the ranch was tense and silent. Reed had cut the ropes from her wrists as soon as they left town, but the woman didn't say a word. She just mounted the horse he offered and followed him, her body rigid with tension, ready to flee or fight at the first sign of danger. When they arrived at the ranch, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and purple. Reed dismounted and waited. The woman descended from the horse with the grace of someone born riding, her eyes sweeping the property, assessing each door, each window, each possible escape route. "My name is Reed," he said calmly, keeping his distance. "This is my home. Now it's yours too if you want." He pointed to the small cabin next to the main house. "You can sleep there. It has a bed, clean blankets. I won't lock the door. You're free to leave at any time." The woman stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching for the lie, the trick, the trap. All white men lied. She had learned that the hardest way possible. Why? The word came out hoarse, as if she hadn't used her voice in a long time. "Why did you buy me?" Reed thought about the question. He could have given 1,000 answers, could have talked about compassion, about doing what's right, about not being able to see another human being treated like cattle. But he chose the simplest truth. "Because I saw in your eyes the same thing I see in the mirror every morning. Someone who lost everything but refuses to lose themselves." The woman blinked, and for a fraction of a second, something softened in her face. Then the mask returned. "My name is Ayana," she said. "It means eternal flower, but flowers don't last long in this desert." The first week was a study in silences and careful glances. Ayana spent the first 3 days in the cabin without coming out, except to get the water and food Reed left at the door every morning. He never knocked, never tried to enter, just left the plate covered with a clean cloth and walked away. On the 4th day, Reed was fixing the corral fence when he felt eyes on him. He turned slowly and saw Ayana standing in the shade of the porch, watching him. She wore a simple dress that had belonged to Sarah. He had left some clothes for her along with the food, and her black hair was braided back, revealing a face marked by small scars. "Good morning," Reed said without approaching. He had learned that any sudden movement made her retreat like a cornered animal. "Sleep well." Ayana didn't respond. Instead, she asked, "What do you want from me?" The question wasn't hostile, just direct, practical, a woman who had learned that nothing in life came for free. Reed put his hands in his pockets, choosing his words carefully. "Company, perhaps. This ranch is too big for one person. If you want to help with some tasks, I'll be grateful, but it's not an obligation. You don't owe me anything." "All men want something," Ayana said, her voice cold as stone. "You paid gold for me. Gold isn't given without expectation of return." Reed nodded slowly. She was right to be suspicious. The world had taught her that men were predators, and she was prey. "You're right," he admitted. "I do want something. I want you to have a dignified life, to sleep without fear, to decide for yourself what to do with your days. That's what I want." Ayana's eyes narrowed, searching for the deception. "And if I decide to leave tomorrow? Then I'll say, 'May the road be kind to you,'" Reed replied simply. "The door will never be locked." Something changed in that moment. It wasn't trust, that would come much later, but perhaps the first seed of it. Ayana took a step forward, into the sunlight, and Reed saw for the first time the full extent of the injuries she tried to hide. Rope marks on her wrists, a deep cut above her eyebrow, bruises ranging from yellow to dark purple. "Need medicine?" Reed asked gently. "I have ointment, clean bandages." "I take care of my own wounds," she said, but there was no venom in her voice. Just a fact. She had learned to survive alone. During the following days, a silent routine was established. Reed worked on the ranch, fixing what 3 years of neglect had broken. Ayana watched from afar, always keeping distance, always with an escape route planned. Sometimes she disappeared for hours, and Reed didn't ask where she went. The freedom he had offered meant nothing if it came with invisible chains. But then, one afternoon, Reed found the garden he had completely abandoned cleaned. The weeds had been pulled, the soil turned. Ayana was there on her knees, her hands in the dark earth. "My grandmother taught me about plants," she said without looking up. "These here are medicinal. You're letting them die." Reed approached slowly, like someone approaching an injured bird. "My wife took care of this garden. After she was gone, I couldn't look at it anymore." Ayana finally raised her eyes. "Death is part of life, but life doesn't end because someone dies. These plants want to live. It would be a waste to let them die from sadness." The words were harsh, but there was a truth in them that Reed couldn't deny. He had spent 3 years letting everything die around him, the garden, the ranch, parts of himself. "You're right," he said quietly. "You can do what you want with the garden, if you want." That night, for the first time, Ayana accepted dinner in the main house instead of taking the food to the cabin. They ate in silence, the sound of utensils against plates filling the empty space. Reed didn't force conversation, and Ayana seemed grateful for it. But when she was about to leave, she stopped at the door and said, "Thank you for the food and for the garden." Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness toward her cabin. Reed stood there for a long time, looking at the empty chair where Sarah used to sit. For the first time in 3 years, the emptiness didn't seem so absolute. There was life on the ranch again. Small, fragile, distrustful, but life. "Give it time," he murmured to himself, though he didn't know if he was talking about Ayana, about himself, or about both. Healing didn't happen overnight. He knew that better than anyone. But for the first time, he felt that maybe it was possible. That maybe they could both find peace on that ranch lost in the middle of the desert. The neighbors started showing up, of course. First it was Mrs. Henderson, bringing a cake and curious eyes. Then old Thompson, with unsolicited advice about how to deal with Indians. Reed dispatched them politely but firmly. Ayana was a guest in his home, not a pet to be displayed or discussed. Once he heard Thompson tell a group of men in town, "Callahan will learn the hard way. You can't trust an Apache." Reed simply looked at him and replied, "Funny, she must think the same about us whites, and who can blame her?" The storm came without warning on a moonless night. Reed was on the porch when he felt the change in the air, that electric pressure that precedes chaos. The sky was black, starless, and the wind began to howl through the pines. "It's going to be strong," he murmured, running to secure the animals in the barn. In the middle of the rush, he realized Ayana hadn't returned yet. She had left after dinner to walk, as she did every night. An hour had passed. 2. And now the storm was upon them. The first raindrops were thick as coins. Within minutes it turned into a deluge. Reed grabbed the lantern and a poncho, shouting her name against the wind. "Ayana! Ayana!" But his voice was lost in the storm's roar. He found her almost a mile from the ranch, huddled under a rock outcropping, trembling violently. But it wasn't just the cold. When Reed approached with the lantern, he saw terror in her eyes, a primitive fear that went beyond the physical. "The thunder," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "I can't... the explosion, the guns..." And then Reed understood. The storm was bringing back memories. Memories of war, of massacre, of explosions that killed her family. She wasn't seeing the Arizona ranch. She was seeing a battlefield where everything she loved was destroyed. "Ayana, look at me," Reed said firmly, kneeling in front of her but not touching her. "You're safe, it's just thunder. Nobody's shooting. There are no soldiers here. Just me and you, and a loud but harmless storm." She stared at him, but her eyes were distant, trapped in the past. Another thunder tore through the sky, and she flinched, covering her ears. Reed did something instinctive. He began to sing. It was a silly song Sarah used to sing when she was nervous, about a rabbit escaping from a fox. His voice wasn't pretty, but it was steady, real, present, an anchor in the middle of chaos. Slowly, very slowly, Ayana began to come back. Her eyes focused on him, on his lips moving, on the strange melody cutting through the thunder. A tear rolled down her face, then another, and then she was crying, deep, painful sobs that seemed to come from a very old place. "I'm sorry," she managed to say between sobs. "I'm weak, You're the strongest person I know," Reed interrupted. "Crying isn't weakness. It's surviving with your soul still intact. Believe me, I know." He extended his hand, not to pull her, but as an offer, a choice. Ayana looked at that hand for a long moment. Then, for the first time, she held it. The walk back was slow and difficult. The rain whipped their backs, the wind tried to knock them down. But Reed held firm, guiding her through the darkness. When they finally reached the main house, closer than the cabin, he led her straight inside. "You'll get hypothermia if you don't dry off," he said, fetching blankets and towels. "You can use the back room to change clothes." When Ayana came out, wrapped in dry blankets, Reed had already lit the fireplace and made hot tea. They sat in silence for a long time, just listening to the storm outside and the crackling of the fire. "It was 6 years ago," Ayana finally said, her voice low. "The army attacked our village at dawn. They said we were harboring renegade warriors. We weren't. We were just families trying to live in peace." She paused, swallowing hard. "My husband tried to negotiate. They killed him first, then my son. He was 7 years old. He liked to hunt rabbits and make reed flutes." Reed felt his throat tighten. There were no words for such pain. Nothing he could say would make a difference. "The other women fled to the mountains," Ayana continued. "I wanted to go, but a bullet caught my leg. I was left behind. When I woke up, I was being sold as a war trophy. I spent 3 years being passed from one man to another, each worse than the last." She looked at Reed with eyes burned by pain. "You asked me why I'm suspicious, why I'm afraid. Now you know. I learned that good men don't exist, and yet you seem determined to prove me wrong." Reed chose his words very carefully. "I won't pretend to understand your pain. I lost my wife and my unborn child, but it was to fever, not violence. It wasn't at the hands of other men, but I understand the emptiness that's left after, that hole that never completely closes." He took a deep breath. "You don't have to trust me, Ayana, but I promise I'll never give you reason to regret being here. This house is a safe place, you have my word." The storm continued for hours, and during all that time they stayed there, 2 wounded souls sharing warmth and silence. It wasn't healing, that was still far away, but it was something. It was a beginning. When morning came, clear and washed by the rain, Ayana left for her cabin. But something had changed. A wall had fallen. Not all of them. There were still many. But one. And sometimes one is enough to start. Summer arrived with its relentless heat, transforming the desert into a furnace. But the ranch was different now. Ayana's garden was an explosion of life. Red tomatoes hung heavy from branches, aromatic herbs perfumed the air, pumpkins spread across the ground like small orange suns. Reed and Ayana had developed a careful dance of coexistence. They worked side by side during the day, sometimes in silence, sometimes exchanging words about work. She had begun cooking for both of them, refusing to let Reed burn more steaks or boil beans until they turned to paste. "My grandmother said that food made without care feeds the body, but kills the soul," she said once, seasoning a stew with herbs that made the aroma fill the entire house. "You were killing your soul 3 meals a day." Reed laughed, a sound that hadn't echoed through that house in a long time. "My wife said the same thing. She swore I could burn water if I tried." It was the first time he mentioned Sarah without raw pain in his voice. Ayana noticed but didn't comment. She just served the stew and sat at the table as was now customary, but peace never lasts long. One July afternoon, 3 men appeared at the ranch. Reed recognized them immediately, workers from the neighboring ranch known for causing trouble when bored. "Callahan!" The leader, a large man named Dutch, shouted. Heard you got a squaw living here. Came to see if the rumors are true. Reed positioned himself between the men and the house, where Ayanna had retreated to the porch's shadow. None of your business who lives here. This is private property. I suggest you leave. Dutch spat on the ground. Don't be hostile, neighbor. We just want to take a look. They say she's pretty for an Indian. Maybe you're willing to share. Rage exploded in Reed like gunpowder. He advanced a step, his hand instinctively going to the rifle hanging near the door. You have 5 seconds to get off my property before I make you leave. The men laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. They knew Reed's reputation. A calm man, but not someone to be tested. Dutch raised his hands in false appeasement. Okay, we're leaving. But think about it, Callahan. You're ruining your reputation because of a savage. After they left, Reed stood rigid for a long time, trying to control his anger. When he finally turned, Ayanna was standing in the doorway, her face unreadable. This will keep happening, she said calmly. As long as I'm here, you'll be judged, ridiculed. You'll lose friends, business, maybe more. Reed shook his head. Men who think like that were never my friends. And any business that depends on me treating you with less respect is business I don't want. Something gleamed in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of something deeper. Why do you do this? Why does what happens to me matter so much? Reed looked at her, really looked, at the eyes that still carried pain. But also strength, at the hands calloused by honest work, at the face that had learned to smile again, even if timidly. Because at some point during these months you stopped being a stranger in my house, he said honestly. You became important. This ranch became a home again, and a home isn't bricks and wood, it's the person you share it with. Ayanna became very quiet. Then, to Reed's surprise, she took a step toward him. Just one step, but it closed a distance that seemed unbridgeable. My people have a saying, she said softly. Don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds you plant. You planted kindness when the world offered cruelty. You planted respect when I expected abuse, and now, she paused, searching for words. Now something is growing that I thought was dead inside me. And what is it? Reed asked, his voice hoarse. Hope, she said simply, and perhaps trust. That night, for the first time, Ayanna didn't return to her cabin. She stayed in the main house, sitting on the porch with Reed, watching the stars emerge one by one in the dark sky. They didn't need to fill the silence with words. The company was enough, but the world wasn't ready to leave them alone. The following week, the local pastor appeared, his expression severe and disapproving. Mr. Callahan, I need to speak with you about your situation, he said, refusing the invitation to come in. There are rumors circulating about you and this Apache woman. As a man of God, I must warn you about the sin of cohabitation outside of marriage. Reed felt his jaw tighten. Ayanna lives in the guest cabin, Reverend, and even if she didn't, it's none of your business. The pastor stiffened. Everything that affects the community's morals is my business. Either you marry this woman properly in the eyes of God, or she needs to leave. Otherwise, you'll no longer be welcome in the church or among decent folk. It was Ayanna who responded, emerging from the house with her chin raised defiantly. Reverend, your God apparently saw no problem when white men massacred my people, saw no problem when I was sold like cattle, but has a problem with a good man offering me a roof. Then perhaps your God isn't as kind as you claim. The pastor turned red, sputtered something about blasphemy, and left in his carriage. When he was gone, Reed and Ayanna looked at each other and, to both their surprise, began to laugh. It was a liberating laugh that shook their shoulders and brought tears to their eyes. Well, Reed said when he caught his breath, I guess we just got banned from polite society. It was a bad society anyway, Ayanna replied, and then she did something extraordinary. She took his hand, intertwined her fingers with his and held it, just that. But it was everything. Autumn painted the desert with shades of gold and amber. 8 months had passed since Reed brought Ayana home. 8 months of slow but deep changes, like water shaping stone. The ranch prospered in a way it hadn't in years. The fields were productive, the animals healthy, and there was always the smell of something delicious coming from the kitchen. But more than that, there was laughter. There were conversations that extended late into the night. There were moments of casual touch, a hand on the shoulder passing by, fingers brushing when handing a tool, that spoke louder than 1,000 words. Reed knew he was falling in love. Perhaps he had been in love for months, but fear held him back, fear of ruining the fragile peace they had built, fear that Ayana would see him like all the other men who had hurt her, fear of betraying Sarah's memory. Until the night Ayana fell ill. It started with a headache and mild fever. Within a day, she was burning, delirious, alternating between violent chills and scalding heat. Reed recognized the symptoms, the same fever that had taken Sarah. "No," he whispered, soaking a cold cloth and placing it on her forehead. "Not again. Please, not again." For 3 days and nights, Reed didn't leave her side. He changed the cloths, forced water between her lips, held her hand when she screamed with fevered nightmares. He prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Bargained, begged, promised anything. "Don't take her," he whispered on the 3rd night, when the fever was at its peak. "I know I don't deserve to ask. I know you already took one woman I loved. But please, not this one. She's suffered too much. Let her live. Let her have the life she deserves." It was then that he realized what he had said. One woman I loved. Present tense, not past. He loved Ayana. Not in the same way he had loved Sarah. It was different, forged in different circumstances, a love that had grown through mutual respect and shared scars. But it was real, it was deep, and he couldn't lose her. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Ayana opened her eyes, weakly focusing on Reed sitting beside the bed. He was pale, unshaven, with eyes red from lack of sleep. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I always would," Reed replied, taking her hand. "Always." Her eyes filled with tears. "I dreamed I was dying. And in the dream, I wasn't afraid, because you were there, holding my hand." Reed felt something break inside him, all the walls he had built, all the fear that had kept his true words trapped. "Ayana," he said, his voice trembling, "these months with you have been... You brought light back to my life, brought purpose, joy, and something I thought I'd never feel again. I don't want you to stay because you feel obligated. Don't want you to stay out of gratitude. But if there's any chance, any possibility that you might feel a fraction of what I feel..." Ayana placed her trembling fingers on his lips, silencing him. "You think I would stay out of obligation? That I'd continue here if my heart didn't want to?" A tear rolled down her face. "Reed, I was dead inside when you found me. I expected nothing but more pain, more use, more emptiness. But you treated me like a human being, like someone with value, choices, dignity. You gave me time, space, respect." She took a deep breath, trembling. "And at some point, without me realizing it, you became my home. Not this house, not this land. You, your kindness, your patience, the way you look at me as if I matter, as if I were precious." Reed couldn't hold back any more. He leaned in and pressed his forehead to hers, tears falling freely. "You are precious. You're extraordinary. And I love you. I love you in a way that doesn't betray my past, but honors my present." "Then kiss me," Ayana whispered. "Kiss me and show me this is real." The kiss was gentle, almost reverent. A seal of promise, of future, of shared healing. When they separated, both were smiling through tears. When you're stronger, Reed said, caressing her face, I'd like to do this right. Not for the pastor who banned us, but because I want the world to know. I want to wear a ring on my finger and tell anyone who'll listen, this is my wife, my partner, the woman who saved my life as much as I saved hers. Yes, Ayanna said, her voice stronger now, but not because of the world. For us, because we chose this, because we want this. Recovery was slow but steady, and during those weeks, as Ayanna regained her strength, they made plans, not big plans, just plans about days together, about seasons to come, about a life built on foundations of respect, trust, and love. In November they married, not in a church, but under the open sky, with the grey-bearded blacksmith as witness and the mountains as cathedral. Reed placed a simple gold ring on her finger, and Ayanna tied a braid of her hair to his wrist, a tradition of her people. Everyone said I would regret it, Reed said, smiling as he held her hands. They said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. And are you? Ayanna asked, her eyes sparkling. Yes, he replied, I regret not doing it sooner. And then he kissed her as the sun set over the desert, painting everything gold, and for the first time in a long time, they both knew what it meant to be whole. The desert keeps secrets in its silent places, and the Callahan Ranch became one of them, a place where love grew against all odds, where two broken souls found repair in each other, where compassion proved stronger than prejudice. Years later, neighbors still talked about them with a mixture of disapproval and fascination. But those who truly knew Reed and Ayanna saw the truth. They had found something rare and precious, a love built not on sudden passion, but on daily respect, constant kindness, choices made repeatedly to value and honor each other. And when their son was finally born, a child with his mother's dark eyes and his father's gentle smile, they called him Samuel, asked of God, because they had both learned that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as decisions the whole world condemns. That sometimes the truest love is the one you choose to build brick by brick, day by day, through storms and sunshine, until it becomes unbreakable. What about you? Have you ever made a decision that everyone condemned but turned out to be the best choice of your life? Share your story in the comments. We never know how many people need to hear that they're not alone. That courage to follow your heart, even when the whole world says you're wrong, can lead to the greatest happiness. Who knows if your experience might inspire someone to have the courage to do what's right instead of what's popular. Let's create a community where stories of courage, compassion, and second chances are celebrated. Tell us, when did you choose your heart over others' opinions?